Hey folks, I want to welcome you to Scientific and Technical Communication, Chapter 15. We're going to be talking about workplace memos and letters. Um, this is going to be the most used and the most utilized way that you're going to be communicating with me throughout the semester. And when you leave this class, this is going to be how you communicate professionally throughout your career. So it's very important that you pay attention, and if you have any questions, please post them on the Q&A discussion board that I actually just made up, or you can go in and mention anything that may concern you on the discussion board for this chapter. So without further ado, the learning objectives for this module are going to be to appreciate the role of memos in the workplace, analyze your memo's audience and purpose, identify the parts and format of standard memo, use proper tone in all memos, write transmittal, summary, and other common types of memos, and appreciate the role of letters in the workplace. You're also going to analyze your letter's audience and purpose, identify the parts, formats, and design features of workplace letters, use proper tone in any letter, explain the global and ethical implications of workplace letters, convey bad or unwelcome news in a letter, write inquiry, claim, sales, and adjustment letters. And let's start off with memos. So memos typically are there to remind the readers about important events, give directives, provide instructions and information, and make requests. These are very short, very concise types of communication that are used when there is already an established knowledge about whatever the subject matter might be. They're important because unlike emails, they signal a more official communication. Now, while an email is technically set up in a memo formatting, so if any of you have ever tried to print off an email, if you look at the formatting of that email, once it's printed, it prints it in a standard memo formatting. That said, it's not a typical general email. You know what I'm saying? Memos are important because they are going to be a little bit more official, and they typically come with a kind of letterhead or tone or imagery. They're going to be listing specifics about the person that's going to be filling out that memo, your title, where you work, all that stuff. Memos also provide a formal written documentation about the event or issues, just like we just talked about. Organizations rely on memos to trace decisions, responsibilities, and track progress and check agreements and commitments made. So you can think of a memo quite literally as a binding contract that once it is emailed, once it's sent, it becomes law. So if you've made a commitment within a memo, be prepared that that could be used. So always plan accordingly when you're writing your memo. It's also very good advice to get a second set of eyes on your memo. Determine your approach to any particular memo. You need to identify various audience members and who's going to receive it. You need to understand who is going to be taking this in. Is it going to be an audience of your peers? And with that comes the ability to go and use jargon, specific information concerning a job. It also determines what is the threshold for common knowledge within the audience that you're talking to. There's going to be a difference in common knowledge between your peers and a mass general audience. General audience is going to have some things spelled out a little bit more for. You also need to understand whether or not it's going to be used for internal or external purposes. While I will tell you always gear most of your work, especially if it's going to be sent electronically, gear it for a potential to be used internally and externally. But encrypted documents, sometimes these things will come, encrypted emails, encrypted memos. they will be made so that they're non-shareable, non-printable, or that they will have some kind of security feature involved. So you are a little bit more at liberty as to what you might be able to say within your company via an internal memo, as opposed to an external memo that may be circulating in the world. The purpose of your memo should also be clear. Is it to inform the audience? Is it going to be to persuade people to support a new plan that you may have? Is it to motivate them to take action? Is it to announce bad news? The thing about any good document, all memos, and don't let this point about is it to persuade people. All memos are persuasive in nature, every single one. If you're sending a memo to inform an audience, and I think I've mentioned this in another lecture, if you're sending an audience information, basic information, the way that information is portrayed is persuasive. People will tend to believe something if it's more professionally designed, more professionally written out. You can look at certain studies where information has been posted to a website that was sloppily, hastily, looked like it was just thrown together, and all the information provided on that website or on that web page was accurate. And then they took a professionally designed web page, something that looked like it took a lot of effort to create, and put a lot of misinformation and false information on that. And people typically believe the false one because of the design. That's rhetorical in nature. That means that it is persuasive. The way you design, the way you say things, the way you come off, your tone, the words that you use, any of that stuff can be used to persuade an audience. and it's also certainly going to be used to motivate anyone to plan, to take action or whatever. And you are certainly going to be persuasive in announcing bad news. There's a big difference with using euphemism or approaching a subject sensitively as compared to being harsh, okay? So they are both persuasive in nature. So all memos are going to be persuasive. It's just some are you're going to be a little bit more open in how you're being persuasive. So memo parts and format. The standard memo has the word memo or memorandum centered at the top of the page, typically. And it's going to include a heading. That's going to be flush to the left margin, okay? Identifying the recipients, the sender and sender's initials, date, and subject. This is not something fixed in stone. However, formatting is typically something that you want uniform throughout your company. So companies typically have a specific formatting and style that they try to perpetuate throughout their company. That being said, some of this stuff may vary as far as the date, the from, the to, the subject, all that stuff may come in different orders. Memorandum or memo may be in different sizes. However, I do recommend that when you write memo at the top of the page, don't be one of the folks that uses the cookie cutter template that uses the memo that's about 3 inches big in real time. It's like a 37 or 40 point font. Don't use a giant memo at the top. And the reason why is because it looks sloppy and lazy. We typically start to make document design a little bit more punctuated, or a little bit more in your face when we have less to say. So we want to try to take up that room through pictures or formatting or whatever. Let the document speak for itself, okay? The text of the memo should be compact and focus on the topic specifically. Do not digress. It should start with a short introduction, a paragraph or two to address that main point, and then a conclusion suggesting some kind of follow-up or action to be taken, all right? When you have all probably taken composition at any university, especially Michigan Tech. Typically, they're going to tell you that we're going to throw out the cookie cutter design for building a good essay, you know, the 5-part essay where you've got the introduction, the background, the main points, the topics or whatever, and then the conclusion, all that good stuff. We're going to throw out all that stuff. We're just going to go from the heart. This is going to be a spiritual release. We're going to be abstract and all that. This isn't the case in technical communication, okay? Technical communication is designed to be getting that point across and being done with it, okay? We're not beating around bushes. We're not being abstract. We are to the point. You're going to start with an opening. You're going to introduce what you're going to be talking about. Then you're going to go directly into what you're talking about, and you're going to close it. That's it, okay? No beating around the bush, no nothing. Remember that most of the people that are going to be receiving these memos all have a job to do. They've all got to work 8, 12-hour days. You know, they're all busting their humps to do whatever they've got to do. The last thing they want to do is get into a long-winded essay-esque email, right? So consider that. For memos sent as email messages, the to, from, subject, and date fields in the email header take the place of these lines on the PDF or print memo. So if you do send out a memo, right, and it's going to be a printed off email or something of that nature, or if it's going to be in an email, typically that to, from, subject, date field is automatically done because emails format automatically into a memo format. So when they're printed off, you get all of this stuff. So there's not really a necessity when sending an email to go and put in another to, from, subject, date, okay? However, if you're going to be attaching this as a PDF document, or you're going to be attaching this as a document, Word document or something of that nature, you need to make sure that that document that can stand alone without presence of that email is formatted in such a way as to include the to, from, subject, date fields, okay? Other than that, the email takes that all for you. It takes it all into consideration for you, which is why when people interoffice emails don't typically start out with this formal looking to, from, subject, date, because it's already in place. If you want to emphasize that your email message is a memo, you can repeat this process within there, but it's a bit redundant and it can look somewhat, it could look somewhat unprofessional to a certain extent. In some cases, unless it's a really large email. I mean, and you maybe want to, I don't know, you've got a lot that you want to say. Maybe you want to add something to that. Other than that, I would just suggest leaving it out. So consider your memo tone. You want to be especially careful about that. Use your common sense and put yourself in the shoes of your readers, okay? I am the most guilty person alive to this day of slipping into nastier tones than I want to. And I think that has a lot to do with me coming from the South or whatever, but it's that direct tone of this is, you know, shooting from the old hip and all that good stuff. The thing is sometimes that can come off as too direct. And when you're too direct in an email, it can sometimes come out too forceful, too nasty. Like you are telling somebody to do something. It can be rough. I do highly recommend, especially when it comes to tone, that you find at least 2 other sets of eyes to look at your paper. I have found myself in trouble with certain departments at the university where I've had to go in and respond with an email, and I made it far nastier than it needed to be. So having people come in, read it, it can really alleviate a lot of future tension and stress. People tend to like to work with people who are open, not closed, forceful, and direct. I mean, we've all worked with those people in group projects, and we all hate their face. That's just the way it is. So make sure that you are considering your tone. Don't be too comical. I know we all like to joke around a good deal. I'm one of those guys too. I like to cut up. I like to joke. Sometimes I would, you know, in an email, pop an LOL. You'll see that on the discussion boards as well. Be careful. Gauge your audience, okay? Who is the audience going to be? And not to mention, that memo may not just make it internally. It may be an external memo as well. Somebody may print that off and leave it in a bathroom. The last thing you want to do is look unprofessional or be talking about something inappropriate with your company's letterhead or your company's information on it, and it's found in a bathroom somewhere, okay? If you're delivering bad news, decide if you want to take the direct approach or an indirect approach, and that's like using the euphemisms and all that good stuff. A direct approach begins with the bottom line. It just states it, gets it right out there, pulls the Band-Aid off quick, okay? Still doing that, you still want to make sure that you are considerate with tone. A direct approach is going to begin with the bottom line and then supports the case. An indirect approach gets us to it, okay? It lays out those details of the case over several sentences before getting to the point, as a way of trying to soften the overall blow. Both ways are equally useful. I would suggest that you find your taste and style. Which one do you prefer? But again, consider tone. Following are the basic types of workplace memos. You have the transmittal memo, and this is going to be accompanying a package of materials, okay? So when you order something from eBay or you order something from Amazon or whatever, it's almost like a packing slip, and you've even got the little transmittal memo in there of them thanking you or whatever you would like in there. But it also comes in stuff as such as a long report, a manuscript, or a proposal, okay? Long reports are these big documents that you would typically attach to an email in a PDF version, okay? And then that email is going to serve as your memo for that attached document, okay? It simply states that the material is being transmitted and or briefly introduces what you're talking about, okay? Doesn't go into deep detail, just gets to the point. Okay? Summary or follow-up memo provides a written record of meeting or conversation. Think of meeting minutes after any kind of meeting that you may have. These are typically sent, these are recaps of a topic that was discussed or that was not resolved at the time, or maybe it was resolved at the time, but you want to send out that email as a reminder or as a company record. And these are typically sent out within minutes to a couple of hours after the meeting has closed, so that everything is fresh, everything is still, able to be used quickly and looked at quickly. And people will use this often as a checklist to make sure that they're meeting whatever kinds of goals that the company or the meeting set in motion. And then you've got the routine miscellaneous memo. This can cover anything, okay? This can cover company picnics or what have you, okay? Guidelines for memos is you don't want to overuse or misuse a memo. Again, it looks pretentious when you're filling out all of that memo information inside of an email that already pre-formats as a memo. So try not to overuse a style for that, especially when you're talking to other people, because it's just unprofessional. And don't misuse memos. This is not a place for you to start throwing jokes, talking about other colleagues, any of that stuff. That is, remember that memos typically travel across a company server. They can be printed and left in different areas. Be very mindful of what you do with those memos. Make sure that you're focusing on one topic within a memo. You don't want to cover too much area. Remember, a memo is a quick document, something that you can speed through and get back to work. This is not some place for you to go and write a haiku. Be brief but sufficiently informative. Again, you're going to hear me harp on this in this class. Technical communication is about concision. It's about accuracy. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not so concise that you're inaccurate or misrepresenting or leaving something out. Make sure it's sufficient, okay? And gauge that audience. If it's a group of your peers, you can leave out a lot more information than what you could typically do with a general audience. Be sure the tone of that memo is polite and respectful. Always consider that this is not going to just be seen by the person you're sending it to. Avoid sounding too formal or too informal on a topic to your audience. all right? Too formal comes off as pretentious, especially within a memo. A memo is supposed to be kind of this just standard, straight and narrow kind of communication method, and being too informal where you start to get lax on how you start to present certain information, using similes, metaphors, all that good stuff. Some of that stuff can come off as culturally insensitive. Always think about how you're going to push that across, okay? And use the appropriate organizational sequences, okay? Direct or indirect, whichever way you're doing it. Remember, you want to start out with the intro. You want to go into the main topics to discuss what you're talking about and then close it, all right? If you're going to be given bad news, you want to get that stuff out of the way in a direct manner, put it right there at the beginning. If you want to get it out of the way, if you want to kind of like soften the blow and get to it, put it down towards the end. You want to follow the standard memo format. And remember, standard, while I'm preaching about it in this class, may not be the exact standard of whatever company you go to work for. Make sure that you understand and know what their standard is for a memo. You want to make sure that you are using white space, headings, and bullets as needed. What do I mean by using white space? White space creates separation within the page, okay? It helps the eye to scan a page better. It's not just about an aesthetic or pleasing or professional look. There is a functionality to it. So make sure that that white space is creating enclosure where it needs to and keeping information together. That's how we know where the intro is. That's how we know where the two body points are. And that's how we know where the conclusion is because of the white space that flows between them, okay? Headings, headings, headings. Headings and bullets are a technical communicator's dream, okay? We love them. If you're talking about a list, instead of doing the standard serial comma list that you see people doing, we don't do that. We do bullets, and we put those down because the eye jumps to them very easily and very quickly, and it's much more simple. It's much more efficient. So you will see a lot of headings and bullets, okay? Headings are specifically important within a memo, especially if it's going company-wide, for people in different departments to jump to sections of that memo that pertains to them, okay? Someone in sales may not necessarily need to know the exact specs on a specific girder, okay? So consider the headings as places for people to find what that information is that they need, and the bullets work in the place of a serial list. No need in arguing over which one's correct, the Oxford comma or the serial comma. We don't do that, okay? Use tables, charts, and other visuals to display quantitative information and to achieve emphasis if needed. I would stress that you use these simply because using tables, charts, graphs, and other visuals and things of that nature typically work rhetorically for you. When you see documents out in the world that have images, schematics, charts, graphs, things like that, they carry a weight of professionalism and this weight of authority, okay? Authority comes from you, and this authority tends to translate as you knowing about what you're talking about. So I do stress I stress the use of charts and visuals, things of that nature, because they really do aid to sell what you're talking about. And it also helps you to achieve not just clarity, but emphasis, okay? Let's say you want to show the figures for how bad this bridge was, for how great this bridge is that you're gonna be putting up or that you're proposing. And you can show, this timeline of effects or whatever, if you wanted to on a specific graph to sell your point, all right? And just telling people about this in text doesn't always convey the importance. When you give people an image, they can relate it. It feels more dramatic, and people tend to listen a little closer. Check spelling and grammar and style. Listen, I would love to tell you you live in a world where those things don't matter. And if this were a composition course, as long as you got your point across, I wouldn't care. But again, we come back down to that rhetorical principle of ethos, where you're trying to sell a credible object, okay? And if your spelling and your grammar and your style is a hot mess, professional circles will dismiss it right out of pocket. They don't even look at it. So get eyes, get other people to come in. Don't get mom, don't get dad, okay? Mom and dad are going to come in there and tell you how much they love you and how great that writing is. Find somebody that hates you. No, don't do that. Find someone who is a bit more indifferent about those things. Even close friends can be a little biased. Find some folks that may have, something that share a similar interest, or even co-workers. Grab a co-worker, say, hey, can you check this out? Make sure that I'm good to go, okay? Grammar, style, and spelling really make a difference in a technical document. And for print copies, you want to be sure that you initial your memo. If it's not a printed email, if it's going to be a PDF document accompanying an electronic email or electronic mail, if it's going to be a print document or whatever, or if you just want that thing to be printed or whatever, make sure that you are listing the heading as it needs to be on there. You need to determine whether you want to send that memo as a body of an email message, as a PDF attachment, or a hard copy. Okay, each one is going to carry with it certain baggage. So if you're going to be sending it in the body of an email message, remember, you don't need to worry about subject lines and all that good stuff. But you also need to consider this is going across a server, and the company will have access to it. And beyond that, it can be printed, whether it's PDF or not. If you're going to be sending that as a PDF attachment, you are going to be thinking about subject headers within that, because it is a living document on and of its own. If it's a hard copy, that one you can consider as well. Remember, it's not going across servers. However, these are the ones that turn up in bathrooms. They turn up on park benches where people have left it, on the pavement where people have dropped it. Be careful. All of these things have a potential of getting out there. So if you're using something, if you're sharing sensitive information, be very, very careful on how you do that. Also, when you're talking about a hard copy, make sure that it's got the subject headers and all that good stuff, but you also need to consider stock of paper, how it's going to print, how it's going to look. All of those have a professional taste. You also want to consider color. If there is color in it, you need to make sure that it's scaled for print rather than living in a digital world, because those two color schemas can be different, all right? It may look a certain way on the printer or on the computer and print in a different color. So make sure that you understand how those things operate, and make sure that you're distributing these things to the right people. Know who you're distributing to a certain extent, in case something does get out, or in case something does happen, we have a reason or a way of knowing who has what where. Not to mention, there's no sense in sending a memo to someone it doesn't pertain to, because all you're doing is sucking time out of their day when it has nothing to do with them, okay? Make sure that it's going to the people that need it. So letters, more formal and personal than memos are, or email messages. These letters are used in situations like to personalize your correspondence, convey a dignified professional impression, represent your company or your organization, and it often comes on a letterhead. To present a reasoned, carefully constructed case, to respond to clients, customers, or anyone outside of your organization, and to provide an official notice or record, okay? When you're considering a letter to the audience, you want to ask yourself, who's going to be the recipient? Is this someone specific to the company, or is it a customer? Is it another contractor? You need to consider these very carefully. What's your relationship to this recipient? Are we buddies? Are we good friends? Do we go way back? Have I met this person once or twice? Whatever. Exactly what information that recipient needs. Don't bog them down with a bunch of stuff they don't need to hear, okay? This is when you consider the common knowledge for the audience that you're going after. If you're going after an audience of your peers, that common knowledge threshold is going to be up here. If you're going after a more public or general audience, it's going to be down here. So consider those things. They don't need to be bogged down with jargon and nomenclature, okay? What level of formality the recipient expects. Does this person, do you know them well enough that you can be a little bit more lax with them than you can with others? Still considering the fact that what you're doing is putting a record out there with your company's information, be mindful of what you put out there, okay? How you think that recipient's going to react to the message. And that's going to have a lot to do with your tone, okay? Or whether or not, or the reasoning. Are you going after money? Are you going after, or are you just trying to say, hey, we owe you money? It's a different kind of thing. When considering letter purpose, ask yourself what you want the letter's recipient to do after reading that letter. There is always a call to action, okay? You're writing that letter for a reason. And at the end of it, there has to be some kind of reasoning for why you've done what you've done, okay? Letters don't exist in a vacuum. You have persuaded or told or something that you've asked for something, and that something needs to be fulfilled. Following are the standard letter elements. You're gonna have your heading and date. If your stationery company has letterhead, which most of them will, but not all of them, simply include the date and a few lines below that letterhead. Flush against the right or left margin. There's no hard or fast way which way you have to have it, unless dictated by your company. When you use your personal address, omit your name because that will appear below your signature, okay? You don't have to put your name at the top because they're going to know at the end. Inside address, okay? 2 to 6 line spaces below that heading, flush against that left margin is the inside address, okay? The salutation, this is going to be 2 line spaces below the inside address, and it begins with dear and ends with a colon. I strongly recommend you avoid to whom it may concern. When you're dealing with customers, or specifically when you're like building resumes, and let's just say this is a cover letter for your resume. I suggest avoiding to whom it may concern. When you go and you give a specific person, it shows that you've done research and you know who might be, you might be addressing. That said, you may not know exactly who that person is, no matter how much research you do. In those cases, I still wouldn't use to whom it may concern. I might pop in dear hiring committee, dear hiring decision maker, whatever. To whom it may concern is very cliche and it's very lazy. You need the text of the letter then. Use a standard introduction, body, and conclusion format, much like you did with the memo, but this is going to be in a much more filled out way, okay? A complimentary closing. The closing 2 line spaces below the last line of your text should parallel the level of formality used in the salutation. There's an example here within this slide. And then a signature. Type your name and title on the 4th and 5th lines below the aligned with the closing, all right? And then sign in that space between the complimentary closing and the type name. That way, there is record that that is you. Following are the optional letter elements that you can add or not add. You can put an attention line, which works really well for people that you specifically are looking for within that company. Attention hiring committee, attention director of research and development, those kinds of things. This is something that you would typically do when you don't specifically know who you're looking at. Place the attention line 2 spaces below the inside address. Subject line. Typically, subject lines are used with memos. You don't necessarily have to have them with a letter, but some people do include them. If the recipient's not expecting the letter, it's sometimes a good thing to have, just to kind of put them in the right frame of mind and where you're going and kind of gain their attention. You want to place that subject line below the inside address or attention line with 1 space line before and after. 1 line of space, I'm sorry. A typist notation. If someone else is typing your letter, if you're dictating it, your initials in caps, or that you need to be making sure that the person who typed that is going to be putting their initials in caps, a slash, and the typist initials. appear below the type signature, flush with the left margin. Enclosure notation, especially when you're talking about cover letters, or if you are sending over a long report, anything like that. What you want to do is you want to make sure that in that same envelope, you're going to indicate one line space below the typist notation, flush against the left margin, state that number of enclosures. Enclosure, if there's only the one resume page, enclosure. If it's going to be several enclosures, start listing the numbers. Copy or distribution notation. If you distribute these copies of your letter to other recipients, indicate by inserting the notation copy or CC followed by a colon on the previous line. This is typically something done as a courtesy, and that courtesy means that you have made another person aware of whatever is going on, okay? Postscript. The postscript, typed or handwritten, draws attention to a point you wish to emphasize or adds a personal note. Place this postscript 2 line spaces below any other notation and flush against the left margin. I don't typically deal in postscript, and the reason why is because I feel like the entire message itself should be emphasized in a way that conveys what you need people to understand. The following elements make workplace letters look inviting, accessible, and professional. The letter format, most popular, is going to be workplace letters in a block format, and every line is going to begin at the left margin with no indentation. There are a lot of digital templates out there from Microsoft Word. This software is going to allow you to select specific templates, pre-designed letter formats, and all that good stuff. Be aware, though, that some of these letters can be quite unprofessional in nature. Consider that. And then not only that, but make sure that you understand, too, that your company may have a specific letterhead. Quality stationery, when you're putting this letter out there, use a high quality, at least 20-pound bond. You want an 8.5 by 11, none of this A4 stuff. Stationery with a minimum fiber content of 25%. It needs to be professional feeling, it needs to be sturdy, it needs to be done well, okay? And you don't need to go in and do anything like cardstock or any of that stuff. Make sure that you're using uniformity throughout the document. So make sure that your margins and your spacing is all uniform. No surprises in formatting whatsoever. When you're using stationery without a letterhead, make sure you frame that letter with 1.5-inch top margins, 1-inch side margins, and bottom margins of 1 to 1.5 inches. Use single spacing between paragraphs and double spacing between, use single spacing within paragraphs and double spacings between every single paragraph. Unlike when you don't go and write an essay for for your class or whatever, where they say don't put the double space after the paragraph. This, you're going to put the double space after the paragraph. Make sure that you're going to be using headers for subsequent pages. If this is a longer than usual document, you want to use headers so that people can jump around as needed. Head each additional page with a notation identifying the recipient date and page number. Align your header with the right-hand margin, okay? These all have to come accompanied with a header. And please, for the love of God, make sure you guys are using page numbers. People print these letters out. There's nothing worse than dropping them when they're not stapled and then trying to put it back together, okay? Please use page numbers. The envelope, make sure that you're using number 10 envelope. Should be the same quality as the stationery. Place that recipient's name and address at a fairly central point on the envelope. Place your own name and address in the upper left corner. Single space these elements. Often, your companies are going to come with pre-formatted envelopes for the left-hand side, and some of them may even have little lines in the center for you to put the recipient's information in. That's all well and good. Just make sure that it looks as professional as you can. If you have sloppy handwriting, I would suggest that you work on it, or see if you can find somebody with a decent handwriting that can do it for you. Or, yeah, that's what I would recommend. Consider these factors regarding letter tone. Establish and maintain a you perspective. All right. Unlike essay writing, again, where you're going around using first and second, where you avoid first and second person, and you're always talking of the one. We're not doing that here. We're direct. In science and technical communication, make sure that you're using that you perspective. A letter displaying a you perspective always puts the reader's interest and feelings first. It makes them think that you are specifically speaking to them. Okay. Under, consider how a lot of the university mail is sent out or emails are sent out. They've even got a little program that'll automatically, in some universities, that'll automatically put your name in there so that it sounds like they're addressing directly you. Listen, it's a show. It really is. It makes them think that you are specifically talking to them, even though they sent out thousands of these things. But it doesn't escape the fact that that you feels like it's still addressing you personally. Make sure that you're being polite and tactful. Make sure that you're understanding the words that you're using. Okay, if you gotta express criticism, make sure you're doing it in a way that is going to create a trust, not something where you're just tearing somebody apart. Okay. A lot of you have always heard of the compliment sandwich, where you give a compliment, something you got to work on, and a compliment. Try to think of a very tactful way to come across any kind of bad news or information that you have to express that's going to criticize. Use plain English. Use plain English. Avoid letterese. Avoid text. The stuffy, puffed up phrases some writers typically use with letterese, shall, to whom, all that good stuff. Don't do it. You keep it conversational. Not only that, when you start to get into that kind of speak, letterese typically comes in this very passive format with a lot of the to be verb thrown out there. We are more action oriented, okay? We like active voice. So if you can find a place where you can use a really cool verb, do that instead. Don't overuse it. You don't want it to sound like you're off of a Game of Thrones episode, but at the same time, you want it to sound professional, and you want it to sound decent, And not only that, it's going to be more concise when you typically use active voice. Avoid letterese. Try not to be flamboyant. Try not to be too far out there when you're trying to type these letters up, because people will look at that as a pretentious act, which often it typically is. But you also want to avoid text. Okay, don't start using slang text terminology in there. LOL, LMAO, LMFAO. People know what some of that stuff means, and it's not professional. Avoid smiley faces, avoid emoticons, emojis, all that good stuff. Make sure that you're sticking with the content that you need to be plain, and be concise. Decide on a direct or indirect organizing pattern. You want to be direct when you expect the recipient to react with approval, or when you want to convey immediately the point of your letter, if you just want to get to the point. Now, this is typically what you see in an executive world, a get to the point style. If you're going to be, you typically want to be a little bit more indirect if you're going to expect that reader to resist it a little bit. And the reason why is because you need to kind of soften them up a bit. Okay, you need to work at it. You need to get to that, and then why don't we try this kind of thing. Ultimately, though, you're still in both directions here. You're still ultimately asking for some kind of a call to action. Global considerations, you need to learn all you can about a recipient's culture and preferences before you correspond. What is going to be something that is culturally exclusive and inclusive, okay? You're not gonna pick up everything they lay down, and you need to be as clear as you possibly can when you're throwing things at them, okay? See how I did that just now? Problems can arise if you're too direct. In certain cultures, there is this heuristic means, this way of bringing you to the point without ever having to say it kind of thing. American culture is completely on the other end. We want it then, we want it now, we want you to say it right away. And this is what you're starting to see more of in a business world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is by, the cookie cutter template. You don't just assume, and never just assume. So understand a little bit about the culture that you're going to be speaking to. Should you share a little bit of personal information? Should you stay away from personal information? All this stuff. Problems can arise if you're too direct, express disagreement, or use salutations or complimentary closes that other cultures find offensive. Okay? Do research. Ethical considerations: if you're going to be tackling a difficult subject, avoid evasiveness or overplaying or underplaying important information. It's okay to use a euphemism. It is not okay to be over euphemistic. Right? Try to find a level playing field where you know they're going to know what you're talking about. Okay. Determine guidelines for letters in general. What you want to do is you want to determine whether the situation calls for a letter, memo, or email, or a mix of a few of them or a couple of them. Determine if the letter needs to be sent as an email attachment, in a hard copy, or both. How do you want that document to live? Use proper letter format and include all the required parts, and company letterhead if necessary. Place the reader's needs first, always using you. Decide on the direct or indirect approach. This is going to come from doing your research through culture, or it's going to come with however you want to deliver specific information, good or bad. Maintain a courteous and professional tone always. Even if you really, really know this person well, try to remain courteous and professional to a large extent, because this document may not just fall to their eyes. Avoid letterese and pretentiousness. Nobody wants it. Keep international readers in mind, cultural differences, and things of that nature. So when you want to convey bad or unwelcome news, all right, during your career, you may have to say no about something that everybody else might be on board with. You may have to make a difficult request, notify people about an accident, or apologize for an error, or even report a death. When you convey bad news, you got to face, you're really facing this ethical, this persuasive challenge. And I don't know how many of you remember ethos, pathos, and logos, but this definitely falls under the pathetic appeal, the pathos. You're going to have to convince people to accept your message and accept it in a way that is more inviting than confrontational. As the bearer of unwelcome news and requests, you're going to need to offer reasonable explanations, so make sure that you have those at the ready. Incentives or justifications, and your tone always needs to be diplomatic, respectful, and courteous, okay? This is not a time for jokes. Don't procrastinate. Don't put it off, okay? If you've got to make the bad news happen or whatever, get it out there. And the reason why is because if you don't, there is a chance they could find out other ways. If someone is about to have their entire department rearranged and people are going to start getting put in different places or terminated, finding out through the grapevine is the worst. Make sure that you are clear, upfront, and open. Never just blurt it out, okay? Always exercise a bit of empathy and compassion, okay? Give a clear and honest explanation of why certain things are the way they are, if you know them. And when you need to apologize, do so immediately, right out of the gate, okay? Don't do it, don't give your reasoning for it first and then come back and apologize, because it just sounds like you're making excuses for why. So just apologize immediately. Use the passive voice to avoid accusations, but not to dodge responsibility. Do not use you to blame the reader, okay? This is where you have to consider. So when we're delivering good information, it's all about the you. When we're delivering standard information, it's all about the you. When it comes to bad stuff, we want to kind of get a little bit more objective. We want to be back here a little bit further. So we don't want to, the bridge falling and collapsing into the river. We don't want that to sound like it's the reader's fault, even if it is. We don't want it to sound like blame. We want to just make it clear what happened, how it happened, what can potentially be done to improve it. Keep the tone friendly and personal. Stay away from being derogatory. Consider cultural cultural inflection and cultural understanding. And this is not a time when you're delivering bad news. It is not a time to joke. Consider the format. So consider the medium. What do I mean by consider the medium? You need to consider, where is this going to live? Am I emailing this to a person? Is it going to be printed and handed to them? Is it going to be sent as an attachment? What are the chances that this bad news may accidentally get out into the water cooler, get around the water cooler, and suddenly everybody's talking about, did you hear what happened with John? Stay away from that noise. So consider the medium. How do you want this approached? Sending it over an encrypted email, that's one way to do it, okay? Another way would be face-to-face. Common types of letters that you're going to see. You're going to have inquiry letters, claim letters, sales letters, and adjustment letters. Inquiry letters are going to ask questions and request a reply. They may be solicited or unsolicited. So these are letters that you are going to be trying to gauge a response, gauge information. Often an inquiry letter is going to accompany, say, beta testing, something of that nature that's going to be something that we can then use to kind of build what we need to build around that. Don't wait until the last minute for an inquiry letter, all right? You do want it planned out, but still don't wait until the last minute. Whenever possible, write to a specific person if you know that person who it is. Again, I would try to stress to avoid to whom it may concern. Do your homework to ask the right questions, okay? There needs to be planning in this, and there needs to be research. Explain who you are and how the information is going to be used, all right? They need to be clear. And when you explain to them how it's going to be used, you don't change tracks, okay? You don't suddenly say, well, I said this, but we could use it for that. No, that is a violation of your trust and their trust. That's a violation of their trust. And you have an ethical responsibility to stick to that, okay? Write specific questions that are easy to understand, nothing heuristic, nothing that people have to read into. Provide contact information in case something happens, they have a question, and be clear in responses. Include a stamped self-addressed envelope so that they may respond at their earliest or best convenience, and say thank you and offer to follow up with them. Claim letters request adjustments for defective goods or poor services. Some of you in engineering are definitely going to be dealing with this. They also complain about unfair treatment or something similar. Such letters are either routine, not debatable, or arguable, debatable. By debatable, I mean a process that someone may find more efficient may not be so efficient to someone else. Okay, that's arguable, that's debatable. Other things, when people start to talk about a defective device, a broken cell phone, or let's say the bridge girder just buckled because it's just crap, that's not debatable. It broke, okay? So consider these. Routine claim letters, you just direct approach. You just get to the point. You're polite, you're reasonable, provide enough detail to clarify the basis for your claim, and no more information than that. I mean, just give what they need. Conclude by expressing goodwill and confidence in the company's integrity, okay? Remember that your company may deal with them on several products, okay? Do not burn a bridge. Arguable claim letters, make sure that you're using a more indirect approach. Once you've established agreement, explain support for your claim, and conclude by requesting a specific action, okay? These are quite rhetorical. You're going to be using a lot of pathetic and ethical appeal. So make sure that you are considering those when you're going out and you're designing an indirect claim letter. Sales letters are written to persuade a current or potential customer to buy a company's product or try its services. Now, you guys are going to think this sounds funny, but your resume and that cover letter is a sales letter. You are selling a specific thing, okay? You are writing to persuade a current or potential customer or employer to buy into you. So make sure that you are considering that by beginning with a question or other attention-grabbing statement. So what I mean by that is if you look at your resumes, you're going to have, some people are going to have a objective, and some people are going to have a summary. That's going to be your attention getter. Make sure it can't look routine. Make it pop a little, make it have a little something different. Get to the point, spell out the benefits or the recipients. What are your job skills? What are your qualifications? Persuade the fact with facts and with appeals to the senses. Avoid lying, okay? Tell the truth. Listen, you may have gone through 20 jobs with a lie on your resume, but it will take that one really good job that you love the most to find out and burn you down, okay? Not to mention it is actually illegal. Everybody has done it. Everybody has fit the bid on theirs. I mean, for crying out loud, Joe Biden lied on his. Everybody does it. Everybody has done it. I'm not trying to pick on any kind of one right or left or any of that. Sorry, I shouldn't have gone into that. But tell the truth. Be honest. Be straight to the point. Don't overinflate. Listen, if you swept the floor, you swept the floor. You didn't do tile maintenance. You know what I'm saying? And then you want to close by asking readers to take action, right? And just like you're selling a product, when you're selling yourself, you're also asking them to take action. Please interview me. Please talk to me. Adjustment letters are written in response to a claim letter from a customer. They can be either positive or negative. You want to make sure that when you're granting adjustments, you've got to begin with the good news. All right, explain what went wrong and how the problem will be corrected next time. Never blame employees as scapegoats. Don't pass the buck. You look weak. You look like you don't know what you're talking about, okay? You need to make sure that you are in control of whatever is going on in your department. If somebody dropped the ball, you dropped the ball if you were representing that department. Bottom line, so never pass the buck, all right? Do not promise that the problem will never recur either, because chances are it will. We live in a real world. People make mistakes. Mistakes happen, and mistakes will happen several times in a row. It just happens. So be realistic. Don't go on there and say, I can't promise you this will never happen again. Just don't mention it. And end on a positive note. You want to leave them with something positive and not something where you are just an absolute screw-up. If you're refusing adjustments, you want to use the indirect organizational plan where you are going to soften that blow and be sure the refusal is unambiguous, okay? If you are refusing, it needs to state plainly, this is being refused, okay? Don't go in there and say, oh, I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. There's too much meat on that bone, and people will read into it in all kinds of ways, and there will be resentment afterwards. You also want to avoid a patronizing or accusing tone, okay? No pats on the heads, good job, good work, none of that stuff. And at the same time, don't go in and say, we did it because you stink, all right? Close courteously and positively. Be professional. Use your best judgment. And if your best judgment is in question, man, go get somebody else's eyes on that thing. All right, for review, I want you guys to consider, why are memos important? What are the purposes of a memo? What are the parts of a memo? How do you determine the appropriate tone for a memo? What are the 3 most common types of memos and what do they do? Why do letters remain important in today's workplace? What are the standard elements of a business letter? What are the optional elements often used in business letters? What are 4 ways in which you can establish the right tone for a business letter? And finally, what are the 4 most common types of letters and what do they do? All right, folks, with that said, I'd like to thank you all for attending this here meeting. And that's Science and Technical Communication, Workplace Letters and Memos. Signing out until next time. See you later.